I may be an evil space Nazi wizard with the blood of countless lives on my hands, but the only thing more powerful than the dark side is consent.
I see this as an absolute win.
Oh, somebody please think of the children!
The only way that you can really stop this kind of thing is to arouse public opinion. It's very upsetting. It has a bad moral effect.
Forced adversity.
Ask yourself, what's more terrifying, fear or the frightened?
The facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire.
Bad, B-A-D-D, bothered about Dungeons and Dragons.
Up yours, woke moralists.
Socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth.
And they're pushing identity politics with this. They 100% are.
How do you think homosexuals reveal themselves?
And the shadow is encroaching upon our own liberty.
I think there ought to be a law against them. Tonight I'm going to show you why.
Welcome to the FAP. Nancy used to do that for me. Handsy Nancy, I called her. Oh, and by the way.
There's no strategy. I have no strategy.
Are you sure?
So that was a fucking lie.
Boom. Boom.
Badoom, badoom.
Badoom, badoom. Welcome, comrades. People of Earth.
Welcome. Broadcasting live from the dark side of the Force.
Absolutely. From the dark side of the Force to the dark side of the moon, we are the Forced Adversity Podcast.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Bob of the Old Ways. This is our co-host, GM Morgan. Dane could not be here tonight, but he was kind enough to set us up with all his bells and whistles, so we should still be able to get super chats.
Yep.
And et cetera, et cetera. So if we get those, we will do all the usual things you're supposed to do with a super chat, I presume.
Hey, commenter actual fandom, I know you're new here, but normally if you want to, you can actually get that sort of resource information by super chatting or going to patreon.com/actualfandom and donating there, and you might be able to interact with the hosts in different ways. Just saying. So what do we got tonight, Bob?
I think we're talking about, we're picking up the AI discussion from last week because you know more about it than either of us.
What? No way. Since when?
And the thumbnail says art should be political. So I assume we're going to be getting into that question as well.
Yes, indeed. So we will we'll get into that later. But we had a listener question about AI. And it's an interesting one. So the question was, we talk a lot about moral panics on this show. And why isn't our reaction just another moral panic? And I think that's an interesting question. And we had another listener question to go into detail about the power consumption issues. Which would you like me to tackle first?
I don't know. Host's choice.
host's choice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will start with the first one because I think it is probably the harder one for me to answer a little bit because I think that it is worth investigating. I mean, worth interrogating. Like, are we overreacting to this?
And it's an aspect of the conversation that doesn't get covered a lot in mainstream media discussions about AI either.
Right. So I would say that obviously I don't think we are, but it's worth thinking about for a minute and sitting with. So when we look at these moral panics we talk about, there are some recurring elements. You often have a group that is in a position of power, targeting either through their own beliefs or through a malicious intent or both, another smaller and or less powerful group to exploit people and their resources. So looking at that, the AI industry is hundreds of billions of dollars at this point, has received government grants from state, local, and the federal government, and from investment banks to the tunes of billions of dollars. They're asking the courts to allow them to ignore intellectual property law in a way that you or I, as people who aren't well-funded or well-financed corporations, could do, right? Think of all of the actions that have been taken towards anti-privacy or anti-internet piracy over the last 25 years, right?
Right.
Stuff with, shutting down the file sharing services, lawsuits over torrenting, different sketchy streaming sites that pop up now and again, publishers sending people cease and desist letters for stealing their stuff. There's been all sorts of news over what happens when you as a private citizen violate IP. But these companies want the court to order the government to effectively null and void those laws for their use. And this affects not just these other companies, but individual artists and creators. So it's everyone from people like, there's a story in Ars Technica I can share. From an interview with the CEO of Getty Images. So let me just pull that up. Screen share. Window. There we go. Boop. And boop. Boop. So Getty Images is spent the last several years, starting in 2021 or 2022, began lawsuits against these AI companies, and the AI copyright violations are coming so fast now that it is too expensive for them to fight every battle. And this is a pretty large, well-known company, doesn't have the money to fight this, much less individual artists who work for commission. I know we have a lot of those sorts of artists in our community. I have bought art from some of those people, where their work gets stolen. Here on YouTube, major YouTubers have had their videos crawled by AI, and their data has been found in data troves and AI training data that they never agreed to. So you have, to go back to the sort of the components of a moral panic, you have a large group with resources. The large group with resources in this case is the one selling something, in this case, what they call artificial intelligence, which is not really artificial intelligence in the way that most people understand it. It is not intelligent. It's not a thinking machine.
Yeah, when I hear the phrase artificial intelligence, I think like Commander Data from Star Trek.
Right. This technology will never reach that level. It is mathematically impossible.
Yeah.
Based on how these large language model databases work, it can never get there because that's not how its heuristics work. So in this case, the smaller people being targeted is basically everybody else from other corporations. Lieutenant Commander. Oh boy, we're getting. Do I gotta ban this guy from chat? Oh my god. So, totally lost my train of thought. Thanks for that, Dane.
It will never reach those heights because its heuristics don't work that way.
Right. And they are using their force to basically abuse the legal system so that they can continue to exert their influence and extract resources from the rest of us. That's something we would warn about in any other circumstance, right? Like, that's not, for a panic to be for a moral panic to be a moral panic. I shouldn't be able to pull up court records of like, yes, I would like to steal all of your stuff, please. Like, there are, filings in court where the position of these companies is, yes, I should be able to rob you. That is too expensive for us to pay for the data we are stealing. And so we would like the court to just excuse our crimes.
And what do you think are their prospects of winning this fight ultimately?
I am not a legal analyst, and I want to put that out there. I am not a lawyer. I read these things. I understand some amount of tech law from the tech side of things, but I would not tell myself as an expert in the same way I would with these AI applications and the places where they are hosted. I think what is going to happen is this will eventually end up before the Supreme Court. Because you are going to end up with a split in the circuits. So how the U.S. court system works is the whole country is divided up into a bunch of districts. And then each of the above those are the circuit courts of appeal, and those circuits are numbered. The Fifth Circuit comes up a lot, has come up on the show before. That's the circuit that includes like Texas. So you have a lot of these immigration cases down there. But also that's where we talked about on the show, Musk's lawsuit against advertisers who dropped Twitter after their ads appeared next to Nazi bullshit. He sued his advertisers in the Fifth Circuit. So this is a court that is typically friendly to these big businesses. So you're going to have a split in the circuits where you're going to have courts go, well, obviously, no, you have to follow the law. And you're going to have some of these other courts that are going to say, no, obviously, you don't have to follow the law. And then it's going to go before the Supreme Court. And I don't know.
Because I think the logic of the historical logic of capitalism would lead one to conclude that the AI firms are going to win because they'll have the power to just ignore these court rulings if it goes against them, and they'll have a presidency.
Right. They do control the presidency because all these companies gave lots of money to the president's inauguration fund, which is basically a black money slush fund. The one thing they have going against them, well, two things they have going against them. One, traditional media companies still have a lot of fucking money and don't get anything from supporting this. Two is that all of these companies are in huge amounts of debt. There's a reason that they are begging Trump for money is because they owe more money than some countries could ever hope to see. All of these AI applications, all of them lose tremendous amounts of money a year. They are all borrowing tremendous amounts of money a year. And that's even with companies like Microsoft and Google forcing them into their products so that way either so they can charge you more or to go to investors and say, well, yes, we're Google and we have so many people using Gemini. But that's because when you put in a Google search, you get a Gemini result with it.
Yeah.
And like Microsoft, we got a super chat. We'll pop that up in a second. Let me finish my sentence. And Microsoft's Office 365 raised their prices this year, $3-4 automatically, but bundled in Copilot, which is their AI application, and you get so many free credits towards that. If they offer a plan, their classic plan, which is closer to the original price without the Copilot stuff, but you can't just go into your account settings and change it. You have to cancel your subscription and then resubscribe to get the cheaper version that isn't bogged down with this AI stuff. So now to pull up the super chat, Low Watermark says, "Hey people, hit like and subscribe for Dane." Hey Morgan, hi Low Watermark, nice to see ya.
And hello, Low Watermark, and thank you for the $50. That's
Woo!
a hell of a contribution there. We're
Thank
done for the
you.
night, folks. Good night.
Time to hit the bar. Not really. All right, no, we got more to go. So that is that question.
So let me ask a clarifying question here.
Sure.
And this is just my opinion. I want to see how much water it holds. I think this is indicative. This whole effort is indicative of the fact that AI companies are aware that their product cannot work unless they are able to steal things.
Correct.
They've been selling their investors on the idea that this is going to lead to some kind of artificial general intelligence or Skynet or something like that, or Rocco's Basilisk or something, and it just can never get there. But to maintain the illusion that we're headed there,
right,
you have to have access to everyone's data.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're correct. In fact, the AI industry admits as much. Nick Clegg, who is the former head of Meta's global affairs, said the other week that if these firms had to ask for affirmative permission to use artists' data, if they had to get consent to use this data, it would kill the industry.
Yeah.
Which I think is incredibly telling.
And I think the thing I see all these guys talking about that makes me laugh is their desire to have what they call an everything app.
Right.
And their description of it is they want to make an app where you can go and do banking, you can do entertainment, you can do like searches for information, et cetera, all on one app. And I keep going, it's a web browser.
Right.
You want to make a web browser.
Well, fun fact, and I think that a lot of people forget about this just because how the passage of time works. We had that. That was America Online.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert for 1999, everyone hated it.
Not just that everyone hated it, but like I can already use my web browser to do all of those other things. Now I need other websites to go to.
Right.
Like my bank has its own website with my data protected, etc. I have to go to Netflix or YouTube or whatever if I want to watch a movie. So I sort of have an everything app already. But what these guys seem to want to do is create an app that has all of that built in as a feature of the app and has access to all of your financial data.
Right. And that they can monetize and mine for more data. Right.
Yeah.
And even if that was a good idea, and it's not, even if that was good for you as a consumer, and I genuinely believe it is not, it's a terrible idea. I want you to think about how many times you hear about someone's social media accounts getting stolen, or how one of your friends starts sending you strange emails because their email account got hacked, right? People's Twitter accounts get hacked. People's Facebook accounts get hacked. The security on these websites is shit. Because they can afford for it to be shit. If your banking information is tied to Twitter,
oh God,
and someone steals your Twitter account, get fucked.
Yeah.
What happens if you get banned from Meta? Meta wants to do the same thing. What happens if you get banned from Meta? Because like I found out that like 1,000 years ago, I made an Instagram account for like some Kickstarter social goal or something. It was like, oh shit, this needs to get shared so many times on Instagram or whatever to add this stretch goal to the Kickstarter campaign. So I made it and I forgot about it. And like it caused years later, it caused my Facebook account to get locked out because I never added my phone number to Instagram.
Yeah. Darn.
Because they wanted my phone, because Instagram needs my phone number.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right. No, these companies don't need that. You as an end user, it is bad. That is just one example of how it is bad for you. That like the security of these companies is so shit, and how they try and monetize your personal information is so invasive that it will very quickly become an inconvenience for you. And I think we're already seeing that with Amazon. We're like, because I think of these companies, Amazon is the closest to that. Just because you can kind of go onto Amazon and do anything except for have a social media site, right? But it is watch TV there, you can buy stuff there, you can find audiobooks there, you can read comics there. It kind of does everything, but it does everything really badly. Like nothing is optimized, nothing is easy to find.
Well, none of these guys have said that their everything app will be optimized either. They're not in it for us. They just want our data.
Right. That's why I was about to get there. That's why Amazon isn't optimized, because they don't fucking care.
Yeah.
So that is are we satisfied with the answer to your follow-up question?
Am I? Yeah, that's a satisfactory answer to me.
All right. So we'll bring this up because someone mentioned it in chat. It's wild how much power AI uses. So expensive, and it really doesn't add anything of value. It actually subtracts value. Make everything app then published. All right. So these data centers, because AI doesn't and people think of the cloud and the internet as this ephemeral space that exists in our computer somewhere, but it exists in a place. The internet is in places. Boop, hey McCloud. It exists in data centers around the world.
Mm-hmm.
The data centers you need for these large language models require specific hardware. The compute hardware required is very specific, and it does not back up. Here's the technical answer for this sort of part of it is that, you know how computers get, like, when you buy a new iPhone or a new smartphone, it is more powerful than your last smartphone by some exuberant measure, like a notable measure, but costs about the same. So that's because normally technology gets cheaper over time, and manufacturers, to keep selling things, will use the fact that it gets cheaper over time to make more powerful hardware. But because of the rate of competition and the lack of iteration in a meaningful, in a reasonable way, they're constantly having to buy cutting edge hardware just to keep up and to try and make their current model work. So they're paying constantly for the highest end graphics cards, which is what they process. They have the right kind of processing power for this sort of work. They don't actually do graphics with them, except when they do like Stable Diffusion and stuff, and the new Google video thing. But CPUs, GPUs, cooling, it is all needs to be the state-of-the-art stuff, because none of the coding is very efficient. They're not iterating, they're not bug checking in the way that other software developers do that will release software on an annual or biannual basis, right? Like, think of even something like Microsoft Office, which doesn't change that much. Like, a new version of that comes out every 3 or 4 years. a new version of Windows comes out every 3 to 5 years. Things like that. They're not doing that. They're constantly trying to push their new version, their new point version. And to do that, they just are pushing the existing code, adding stuff onto it, throwing it on new hardware. None of that stuff is very efficient. The code isn't very efficient, and the hardware is the highest power draw hardware that exists. Often because of how much of it you need. It's in very densely packed data centers to optimize the space. Mm-hmm. And that means you need incredibly strong cooling. Cooling that is 5 to 10 times more exhaustive than your average corporate data center. Instead of there's a lot of data centers use raised floor cooling or like end of row chillers that cycle the air where it blows air out the front. And then there's a cold aisle where the servers will pull air through to cool, and they go into a hot aisle where the air is contained, and then they get cycled back through the coolers. These places often have enclosed structures for the rows where no heat or cold air escapes to try and get as much as you can into a densely packed area. And they have to use all of it. And everything has to be redundant. And so what that means is you have a lot of not just power resources for the compute itself, for the actual application, for when someone goes onto ChatGPT and asks, how do I make a sandwich without killing myself? You also have to power the cooling. And you have to have water for the cooling. And you have to have glycol for the cooling. And that has its own emissions, its own heat it gives off and stuff, because that heat has to go somewhere, right? Like how it works is that you have a liquid. Water works very well, but also things like glycol are used, where it cycles through to pull the hot, the water gets heated, it pulls away, it goes into the chiller, comes back down, and cycles through. And so that is wasting a huge amount of natural resources besides the electricity for these very inefficient, power inefficient computers.
Right. And here's the problem. I mean, you described the problem, but from the carbon footprint perspective, all of these power requirements have to use the currently existing power grid.
Right.
Which is powered by fossil fuels. And it means we're going to increase our use of fossil fuels in order to try to make AI happen.
So for
all of these... Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
All of these tech bros will tell you that this will work, that, they'll say that this is for like a sustainable energy project. They are assuming that we are going to do nuclear power or solar power or some other nebulous power grid that doesn't exist yet, and probably is not going to exist for decades. But I've seen a lot of these tech bros selling or addressing this point about power usage by pretending as if we're already using sustainable energy to do this.
So here's one about an hour north of me in Port Washington, Wisconsin. They're building this new data center. They had to annex over 1,000 acres of land. This is even the newest story. The company that bought it and is constructing the building will not say who they are selling it to, like who is going to own the building. There is a buyer for this building. But when they went to the city government, they did not say who is going to be buying it. And it'll employ 50 to 100 people. Here is the point of note. All right. The developer said he couldn't give specific acreage or wattage for the data center yet, but he said most modern data centers require 350 megawatts. That's enough to power 280,000 households, which is 50,000 more than the entire city of Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Microsoft, about 40 minutes south of us, is building a data center in Mount Pleasant, which is in Racine County, that is expected to use 450 megawatts of power when complete. And that, like, any money, the power that the electric company, We Energies, would get towards that, because of how the laws around our power monopolies work in this country, you and I as ratepayers are going to pay for that. The company will not, well, rather the expense of the company, their power requirements will get spread out over all ratepayers. So Microsoft isn't paying to have the power grid upgraded to, hit this power requirement. This developer with their shady partner isn't going to pay to upgrade the power infrastructure in that area for this. That is literally me.
All of us will be made to pay for it. And this is essentially, they're essentially adding, in terms of energy consumption, they are essentially adding entirely new cities out of nowhere to our power consumption.
And our power grid in most places of the country is somewhere between 50 and 70 years old on average. Because how the laws are structured, because most places have a monopoly where there's a private company that holds the monopoly, but they are restricted by law as to how much money they can make because they're allowed to have a monopoly. They're only allowed to charge rate increases for new power stations, new lines, etc. They can't do that when they're upgrading or replacing existing lines. So if your power line goes down in your neighborhood, or they want to replace it because it's old or rusted through, or the wood it's attached to is decrepit, they can't charge more to replace that. That comes out of their profit. But if they build a new substation or a new power plant or new lines to a new development, they can charge for that. So I want to address this because this is interesting. So RXNV says, to be fair, electric grids are natural monopolies for obvious reasons. This is true, but there is an alternative. They could be state-run.
That's what I was going to say. This is the reason they should not be privatized.
Right. The solution to this is, yes, you need a natural monopoly. We can look at Texas and see why you need a natural monopoly, but it should not be privatized.
And it should not be for profit either.
Right. Like your electric bill should be a tax you pay to a state organization that runs the electric grid.
Yeah.
That should not be a private institution. But this is America.
So anyway, this whole thing angers the shit out of me because I don't see any way, and in the short term, I don't see any way out of it for average people. We're just going to be stuck with this. And
look, there are some things you can do as an average person. Because I agree, we are stuck in it. We are all, as an average user, stuck in it. But there are things we can do. One, don't use Google. Stop using Google.
I use DuckDuckGo, baby, which is built on Bing, but
which is still, but it doesn't use the Copilot results. So it's drawing from Bing's search algorithm, but it is not actually Bing.
Yeah.
Support local artists. Support companies that don't use AI. Because often, even when companies say they're not going to use AI, they will then get caught using AI. And companies that have it happen to them will have it happen over and over and over again. We've seen this with Wizards of the Coast and some of their Magic the Gathering advertising.
Mm-hmm.
But
a lot of this does seem to have the way that so many companies are rushing to force AI on the rest of us in absolutely everything, including now in DuckDuckGo, which has its Duck AI option, which thankfully you can opt out of very easily, but they're still doing it. And it all just has like the feeling to me of like a religious fervor, or
it is
like a reverse moral panic,
Yeah, I would say religious fervor is a good comparison. There was Adam Conover did an interview with an author who was writing a book on this, where there is a definite religious comparison to this.
Yeah, I mean, like as someone who has an academic background in religious studies, I see a lot of that trending too, especially around the idea of Rocco's basilisk and how a lot of the tech bros talk about this in utopian terms or apocalyptic terms.
Right.
Apocalypse in the sense of a sudden reversal of power relations, not just the sense of everything will be destroyed, but apocalypse generally means a turning of the tide into something like a sudden change that after which there's no going back. And that's the way they talk about AI. And it really, it baffles me that the galaxy brain rationalists have developed their own religious philosophy.
It is interesting. I'm going to pull this one up. You got a super chat from Sean. Thanks, Sean. As a person living in Texas,
$5, Sean.
As a person living in Texas, I can tell you state-run power
is one of the most corrupt things in the state, and that says a lot.
Don't they have like a highly segmented, privatized grid, though? I didn't think the state ran the power in Texas. That was all these little fiefdoms.
Well, the reason it's corrupt in Texas is because Texas is being run by a political party that does not believe in using the government for anything.
Anything good at any rate. They believe it in, imprisoning pregnant women and trans people.
Right. If we had state run utilities being run by a political party that believes in the power of government to do good things, then it would work.
Right.
Or it would work better, I should say.
Probably. They have invented their own God in a lot of ways. Like whether God is going to save us all or kill us all it depends on the person you're talking to within that industry. And in some ways, I think this was inevitable in big tech. With how big tech relates, like big tech's relationship to consumers, both like individual consumers and enterprise consumers, is that you're not allowed to have a stable status quo. You're like that is not allowed. And so we have seen this before, like, we've seen it with smartphones, right? I think smartphones are the thing we're probably most familiar with where this is played out in, where like it was a big deal when smartphones came out, but now they're kind of rote. And so they're trying to, you have different phone manufacturers trying new things, whether it is more advanced cameras, it is including AI, it is these new flip phones of varying quality. Where like it's trying to reinvent the wheel to try and have that big market splash, like we kind of expect of the tech industry in some ways, because we had several decades of repeated notable advancements, going from home computers being affordable to home internet being affordable to DSL and cable internet being affordable to, smartphones and the internet being in your pocket. That all kind of stopped because, where do you go from there? And I don't know, right? Like if I am a person in the tech industry and someone asks me, well, what's the next big thing? I don't have a good answer for you. And so for a long time, we've been kind of fishing for one. And I think we've had some that have come, have had a pretty big impact. I think the iPad and high-end tablets, like some of the Microsoft Surface stuff, is pretty revolutionary. I think that or it was when it came out, I think things like the Chromebook, as far as like cheap, affordable, reliable computers, has revolutionized education. But that doesn't make investors wet. So this is why we've had things like crypto and NFTs and now AI. And I think the difference between crypto and NFTs, which I think most average people see as scammy, and AI is that AI is something, one, that we've all heard that term before, and it means something to us.
Yeah.
And two, it has enough of the appearance of usefulness to be marketable.
Yeah, like I know a lot of people that for them AI is just the fun ability to make a cartoon of yourself.
Right.
Right. They know that that's something that some of these so-called AI programs can do, and they think that's cool.
Right.
But they don't. The people I talk to anyway, which is,
right.
Obviously I have a limited social circle like everyone, but I don't know anyone who thinks it's AI is ever going to do anything more than let people cheat on their homework or
right.
Make a cartoon avatar or something like that.
I mean, I have known people who think it will make jobs redundant, and I know it has been used to make jobs redundant, but badly.
Yeah, I mean, like people at the level of business ownership think that this is going to make things more efficient because they can eliminate labor.
Yeah, I know there is a business that laid off some of their help desk people to replace them with AI.
Yeah,
with chatbots, and it did not work.
Yeah, but they think it's going to work. That's the thing. They will, and this is how it's like a religious movement. They will ignore all evidence to the contrary and maintain loyalty to the required conclusion.
Right.
No matter what it costs them.
No matter what it costs. Yeah, that is definitely the religious element of it.
It is something that has to happen from according to their ideology. But so I get it. I get that from like the business owner perspective and the political propagandist perspective with the new VO, the new regime. But I mean also like the new Google VO tech that they put out, where it's almost photorealistic now, and it will never be less convincing than it is right now. So it's used for like political propaganda, fake news, revenge porn, all sorts of horrible stuff. But at the end user end, like the average person, I don't think any of us see this as being useful for anything world changing. It's just going to be a fun tool to make like goofy memes with or something like that.
Right.
And it's
that's the case scenario.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the things where like the underlying technology, the large language model, machine learning does have a use case, but because how it was iterated upon and how it was developed to be a marketable product rather than a usable one, it's destroyed its own use case. That the more training data you feed these things, the more wild the hallucinations become. The more the biases of the person determining the parameters for training data and data harvesting, the more apparent those biases become.
Yeah. And the problem with a lot of the suggestions of what average people can do is that eventually it's going to be functionally impossible for most people to do those things.
Right. Yeah.
Like Sketchy just said in chat, you can always use open source software to avoid AI. That is true, but the vast majority of people don't know how to do that, and they won't learn.
Right.
And they're not incentivized to learn. So functionally, that is an impossible solution for most people.
It is.
That's what the tech bros are counting on.
Right. Like with the Microsoft cost increase to add Copilot, it took me months to like finally be like, I have to get rid of this.
Yeah.
Like they raised the price and okay, yeah, now I'm paying for a Copilot. Yeah, fuck whatever, I don't care. I'm not going to use it. But then like it keeps trying to get you to use it to the point where it was interrupting my ability to use their tools.
Yeah.
The other thing they're running into, and this is probably going to impact some of the companies like Microsoft, is that like, so with Windows, right? They're integrating more and more Copilot stuff into Windows 11, and Windows 10 is end of life. If you're a company whose privacy or security requirements, either to your business's liking or by statute, in some cases, like in the healthcare industry or like defense contracting. You just can't have that shit on your computer. So you have a service contract with Microsoft that's like, oh, okay, you're going to upgrade our stuff to our specifications. Neat. I want Windows 11 because I need the security updates, but Copilot is a security violation.
Yeah.
Solve that problem for me. And Microsoft is struggling with that. Pretty badly. And I imagine that sooner or later we are going to see lawsuits where there are companies that Microsoft has a contract with for support and service that they cannot meet because they will not make a version of Windows 11 without Copilot.
Yep.
Because if they do, then people will want that. People want to be able to buy that version of Windows.
Yeah, and eventually you will no longer have the option to disable AI images and searches or anything like that either. That is a temporary thing. They're going to take that away from us eventually too, because they have a fiduciary responsibility to their investors to make AI profitable, and they know it's not profitable.
Yeah, Google this week, if you use the Gmail app, you can no longer turn off AI summaries of your emails.
Yeah.
So you have to use a third-party mail app, which if you're on iPhone, is very easy to do. If you're not on iPhone, it's all Google integrated, so good luck. That's all I can say, because it's hard to unconnect those things with an Android. But even then, Apple still is kind of, they're a little more bearish on AI integration, but they're still pushing it because it's what their investors want. So I imagine at some point that will come to Apple as well, just slower. But yeah, I think the solutions that are out there, like if you as a person want to live an AI-free life,
good luck.
Good luck.
Yeah. I think this bubble, economically, will pop.
Yeah.
Eventually. But
yeah,
this technology is with us to stay as long as we have computers and the internet.
Right.
And it's going to be a question of parsing out the legitimate use cases.
Right.
Versus the what we have now, which is just like the imperialistic imperative to consume everyone's resources without our consent.
The AI colonialism of the internet.
Yeah.
I think it's something you said in our group chat, which was quite fascinating. But yeah, if you are listening and you would like to remove yourself from AI, one, if you have a Windows 11 machine, maybe stick with Windows 10, or see if you can downgrade to Windows 10. If you cannot, try Ubuntu. It's Linux. It's easier than you think. Still not necessarily easy, but easier than you think. LibreOffice is a free Office product that is not AI integrated. It is downloaded as not a cloud service, though. For your email, if you want to get away from AI in your email, there is one solution. You have to pay for your email. Free email is going to be linked to AI for at least a decade. That's just the way of things. I know Proton Mail is one that is very popular that you pay for and does have encryption features. And I believe they offer some cloud storage as well, which is also good to have. But I haven't used it yet. Your ISP often has a email address associated with your account that is owned by them on their servers. Your odds are your ISP is not involved in that AI business in the way where they are harvesting your data for that, because you're a customer. Whereas, like, if you have a Gmail account, you are the product, you are not the customer. If you are not paying for something, you're the product. That's just rule one of living on the internet.
Yeah.
So I want to answer this because this is so from Sean. How is AI reading your email not a security and privacy violation? Well, it is. By law, it is not, because you signed that away. There's an end user license agreement you signed at some point in a click wrap where you agreed to the terms and service, and you don't have those rights anymore. You signed a contract that says I don't have those rights anymore. It's really that simple and that evil. To answer your question, Sketchy, can we go back to Windows XP? No, you can't on modern hardware. It is not compatible. I am so sorry.
Can we go back to Netscape, please?
It's called Mozilla now.
Yeah, I know.
What's interesting, though, speaking of Mozilla, so we use Firefox on our main desktop. My spouse loves Firefox. You are looking at Firefox on your screen right now. Is that there are a bunch of web applications, including StreamYards, that often just don't work on Firefox for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Like a lot of online banking just doesn't because it's too secure. Now we're going back in time. Let's go to DOS. Which DOS? Whose DOS?
Bring back the rotary phone.
Bob, you're dating yourself there.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? When I was a kid, there were these books where you could go and look up anyone's contact information.
I know.
It was just out there. You could dox anyone by just looking up their name in a book. And
they dropped it off at your house.
Yeah. You learn where they lived and what their phone number was, and sometimes other things. It's amazing.
So to address this, so I think that there's an alternative will pop up. I agree. There will become a market for non-AI alternatives, but it is going to be hard to find word of mouth. And when we're talking the tech startup industry, if this company already doesn't have money, they're going to have to go to a bank to get money, or get money from some sort of angel investor or something. And a lot of that industry is so heavily invested in AI that will be hard to do.
Right. I was going to say everyone in the investor class right now is so high on the AI bug that they simply will, even if a market exists objectively, they will not believe it is true.
Right.
You can provide them all the graphs, all the data, everything, and they simply will not believe you, and therefore they will not invest in your business.
Right.
Unless this is the thing. I think this is I'm cynical about this because I think this highlights the fact that there is no such thing as a free market. We have never had a free market.
No.
And the people at the top have decided that AI is just going to happen.
Yeah.
And the rest of us have no choice. So for at least 10 years, it will not be possible to build a business that is a non-AI alternative. The money class just will not let that happen.
Yeah, I think that an alternative will exist, but it'll be entirely in the open source community.
Yeah.
And despite open source evangelicals saying that open source is going to take over everything in 5 years, they've been saying that since I was in high school. It's
right. This is why when everyone left Twitter, why Mastodon didn't happen.
Right.
Because most people are not looking to become open source software users. They don't want to learn coding or any of the other stuff. They just want to go to something that does exactly what Twitter does and do exactly what they did on Twitter as easily as they did it on Twitter.
Right.
And they don't care about the back end at all.
Right.
And relying on open source stuff requires you to care about the back end stuff,
right,
which most people will never do.
Right. And open source stuff it's less feature rich. That's really what there is to it. It just is. That's the nature of using an open source platform. And if you're okay with that, or if that's worth it to you, do it. Right. I use Linux. I don't at the moment because I just don't have time, but I like Ubuntu. I like it a lot, but it requires a little more attention to get it set up.
Right. And like you said, if that's what somebody wants to do and they enjoy that,
do it.
And it empowers them, do it. But just don't expect that is going to be the alternative that everyone else does, because it's not.
Right. I'm a little more. I think this bubble is closer to collapsing than you do, Bob. I think that's because of these banks only have so much money. And we are already at the point where banks are borrowing money from other banks to lend to these AI companies. That bill is going to come due. Those loans have terms. And when they can't pay, at some point we're going to have a bank failure. And I think that is where the dominoes will start to fall.
Right.
Because I think unlike the crypto industry, which is very decentralized by design, the tech startup is very much like the tech startup industry and the AI industry are very much tied to a specific small number of banks that are that are boutique banks that cater to Silicon Valley, that are used to over investing in their bets paying off. And we are already past the point where that was supposed to happen by now. So I would give it 5 years instead of 10, but I think like when it comes to like Microsoft and Google, I think the 10-year estimate is closer to realistic because those companies are too big to fail. But yeah, that's AI talk. Any questions? Cool. Anyone have it? Everyone feel great?
I wish we lived in a reality where AI was the pathway to fully automated luxury gay space communism.
Oh, me too. Happy Pride.
It is not. Although some of the tech bros do try to sell it that way. If you look at what guys like Ray Kurzweil are saying, or I forget who the other one I'm thinking of is, but there's a couple of tech bros out there who are basically like, we want Star Trek to be real. And the rest of them are all like, we want Blade Runner to be real.
Right. We want Blade Runner. Right. We're inventing the Torment Nexus.
Yeah.
Very much that. And I think another part of the industry is very much they sell it as wanting to democratize creativity, but really it is we want to flatten creativity. We want creativity to be a wholly commercial, wholly marketable, wholly controlled activity.
Yeah.
And
I think it's really telling that a lot of these tech bros we've talked about Curtis Yarvin on this podcast before about how so many of them are like beholden to this new techno-feudalism idea. And a lot of them, their actual explicitly stated goal is to build cities where the US law doesn't apply.
Yeah.
And only the tech bro gets to decide what happens.
I mean, Elon Musk is trying that right now in Texas.
Yeah. And that's where all of the political energy is going, at least for the next 4 years.
Right.
Is the dismantling of liberal democracy in favor of a feudalistic system.
Yep. Oh, yeah. So, but I think this is why we see people like, what's that dipshit? Oh, gods. The sword nerd.
The sword nerd?
The sword nerd who like wears
Shadowversity?
Yeah, that one. This is why we see people like him and Star Wars Theory involved in doing AI art, is because they have this
nice segue.
Thank you. They have this I try. They have this idea that art shouldn't say anything. They couch it as art shouldn't be political. And often the common response is by people, and it's the correct response, that all art is political. And what that means is that either a lot of art has explicitly political messages. And we've covered that on this show before, but also art is a moment in time frozen and preserved to be seen by others. It reflects the values of the time, the reaction to those values, the resources that are available that go into producing it, the things in society that impacted the creator. So when we say all art is political, that's what we're talking about, both the political message that a lot of art entails, and that like art is a reflection of the politics of the day.
And not just that, it's also often the individual creators are politically beholden to patrons
right,
who wield political power, and that's been the default state of art creation for most of the history of the West, at least.
Right.
I can't really speak to Asia or Africa, but I assume it's probably similar there too. But like a lot of the great works of art that we all celebrate in the modern world, like the plays of Shakespeare or the paintings of Da Vinci, for instance, were all commissioned, not all of them, but most of them were commissioned by people with political power in order to flatter themselves. And you basically had to sing for your supper if you were an artist. Like a lot of Shakespeare's plays about his histories are basically political propaganda in favor of the Tudor monarchy, which won the War of the Roses and wanted to write history in their favor. You know? So yeah.
You have that, and even like you know, Roman statues are often, Greek statues were commissioned by rulers, by senators, by kings, by emperors to portray their territory, their empire, their kingdom in specific ways. Oh, so much of famous art is that way. The Vatican City is basically one big work of art at this point, commissioned by the Catholic Church, an organization we have discussed at length on this show, along with their crimes. But I want to make a positive case, because I think sometimes we, left of center these days, are making a reactive point and sort of arguing for a status quo, right? All art is political. The reaction to art shouldn't be political is all art is political. We're not arguing for anything really other than the status quo. And I think that is kind of detrimental to how we discuss things, especially when people are coming at us from a position where they are aggrieved. They don't like how things are. Saying it's always been that way is not a progressive mode of thought.
True. But it is a starting point of a conversation. Like when I say art has always been political, and then you move on to here's why doing it in a particular political direction is completely acceptable and should be encouraged.
Yes, absolutely. And so I want to make the case with a couple of examples as to why art should be political, not just is political by nature. And so I've got a little essay for you. So there's this movement that recurs in history. It's an echo we're hearing right now, that art shouldn't have a message, that art shouldn't reflect its place in time, that art should either reflect nothing or just belong to a narrow range of pre-approved propagandistic formulas, like we've seen in the Third Reich, like we've seen with things like the Hays Code. And
imagine thinking art should not have a message. Like, what do you think art is?
Is right. What is what is? Imagine that. But people they convince themselves they think that, but they don't, because they when they think that, it's because the art disagrees with their politics.
Yeah.
So we're making the case that art should be political, and if it upsets you that it is, that might be the point, and maybe you should reflect on that. So I want to go back to the past. It's the year 1979 of our Anno Domini calendar. Japanese television show comes on the air and is soon canceled after 39 episodes. It will go on to become one of the biggest media franchises in history. Its characters will appear on everything from model kits to credit cards. Cars will be sold themed off of some of these characters. Statues will be built in Japan to commemorate milestones of this franchise, including animatronic statues that are like moving robots. It's been called the Star Trek of Japan. Its first villain's popularity has been compared to Darth Vader's in Japan. And it and its sequels are some of the most overtly political stories you might ever see in popular media. Yep, got it. One. It's Gundam. For those who don't know, Gundam is a series of war stories and a massive model kit selling machine from Japan that is set in a series of alternate calendars where humanity wages war against itself using militarized robots called mobile suits. But we're not going to talk about that. Its creators are what's interesting to me. These are people who grew up in Japan in the aftermath of World War II, in the 1940s and 50s, under the rule of the Japanese Empire and then the American occupation. Their whole life is in this shadow and the shadow of the Cold War. And the story of Gundam remixes those themes, remixes the lessons of their lives as they put it on TV. Gundam is a story that's functionally a remix or retelling of World War II, but with the lessons of the Cold War mixed into it. So it's a space opera that takes place between in a war between the Earth Federation, which is ostensibly a democracy, but like our ostensible democracy here, it is rife with corruption, corporate rulership, and general class abuse. And the group of space colonies farthest from Earth called Side 3, which has adopted a revolutionary political philosophy under a man named Zeon Daikun, who gets killed by a second in command who takes over and creates a military autocracy that ostensibly liberates neighboring countries, but effectively subjugates them, kills them, gasses them, and drops their homes onto the planet. So you have this sort of like Lenin and Stalin figure who believe themselves to be the heralds of a master race, though. That's sort of the difference between them and our real world Lenin and Stalin, is they see this space as a place where humanity will evolve. Which sort of leads this revolutionary idea to devolve quickly into fascism, where they see themselves as the first among equals in space. And you would think, as an American listener, most of you, some of you I know are in Europe and elsewhere, that this is an analogy for Nazi Germany and for the Soviet Union, but it's not. Because this is a reflection of Japanese politics. And you're like, well, what does that mean? So Japan justified the Empire of Japan engaged its own colonial product as it was influenced by Western imperial powers, including the United States, to liberate Asia from Western influence. And they did this by conquering their neighboring countries. This liberation through conquest philosophy was kind of the crux of their involvement in World War II, and where we drew a lot of our allies in Asia to fight against them. The Korean resistance, the Vietnam, people in China, because China was occupied. The Japanese sold themselves liberators, but they mostly just killed Asians in the name of decolonizing Asia while they instituted their own colonial project. And the crimes of this Japanese empire are so great that to this day, the ruling party in Japan has for decades worked to deny, diminish, and underplay their crimes. But in this first generation of people who grew up around people who were involved with and survived this occupation, they told a story about it that has gone on to be the story of both the witness to history and its erasure. And that brings us to another character created in at about the same time, but in America. Another robot-themed character who I think some of you are familiar with. But I'm going to bring them into 2005. To a company we all know today as Marvel Studios. It's the TV and movie production arm of Marvel Entertainment, the parent company of Marvel Comics that is now today owned by Walt Disney. And they were looking to switch from just licensing out their characters to doing their own in-house movie production, making their own stuff. But they had a problem. Marvel was kind of bad at doing business. They kind of went bankrupt. And to get out of bankruptcy, they sold the film rights and TV rights to a sizable portion of their most popular characters to bail themselves out. And we're talking about everyone from Silver Age heroes like the Fantastic Four to the more, at the time, modern hits like the X-Men and Daredevil.
And Spider-Man and the Hulk.
Spider-Man and Hulk.
Yeah.
And X-Men was their biggest selling team in the comics at the time. And they sold the film rights to the X-Men. So they sold everything that wasn't nailed down that they thought they could. But they wanted to do a movie still, and they didn't have much left. But they had this guy. So they picked a character who actually, and when this movie is being developed, was a bad guy. He had been the antagonist of the Civil War event, where he attempted to turn superheroes into instruments of the United States government. Not only that, before then, this character's most famous stories usually involved him struggling with addiction, engaging in very dated yellow peril cliches, and then people stealing his toys and trying to murder him. This is Iron Man, and the movie tells a version of his origin story. Happy Pride Month, Rachel!
Happy Pride Month and Happy Dinosaur Day. I want to point out that
Dinosaur Day
is Dinosaur Day.
It is Dinosaur Day. Happy Dinosaur Day. So, the origins of the character. The character's origins were based on the same Cold War that the creators of Gundam grew up in. And were set in a place that was very familiar to these, or that inspired the story of Gundam, which is Vietnam. Because, like everywhere else the Japanese put their boots during World War II, they were pretty much horrible to the Vietnamese people. And in the 60s and 70s, we put boots on the ground and were also very horrible to the Vietnamese people. Some things never change. Iron Man put his boots on the ground in Vietnam as an arms dealer. And he was captured by communist soldiers who wanted to force him to develop weapons after fatally injuring him. He develops a suit of armor to both sustain his life and to escape captivity. This Cold War story got a refresh in 2005 while this movie is being developed, called Extremis, was the name of the storyline. It takes place in Afghanistan. And this is sort of tying the themes together of like the stories of the wars that influence the creators and the people make the art better. Because now the Iron Man origin story in this Extremis comic, and then the MCU that follows it, has an Iron Man who is injured in Afghanistan. A place where, at the time this movie comes out, a lot of Americans are being injured. A lot of Americans die to the same sorts of weapons that kill the soldiers that Tony Stark is with at the beginning of those movies. And Tony Stark at the beginning of that movie is shown to you as part of the problem. He's an arms dealer. The weapon that injures him is his own. And so this movie, Iron Man, probably the most famous movie of the MCU, and the thing that kicked it all off, is a sign of the times. It's this reflection of the politics of the people who wrote it. And not just their politics personally, but the politics of the world and of America. Because in 2008, when the movie comes out, we had seen 2 U.S. invasions in the Middle East stall out. Everyone knew somebody who spent time overseas or who lost family in the Middle East. Meanwhile, you couldn't escape stories about American abuses in prisons to civilians, or the military-industrial complexes, mercenaries called private military contractors committing war crimes. And in the movie Iron Man, Tony Stark rejects that. He stopped selling weapons. His company tanks. And he represents us in a lot of ways. This billionaire tech genius is someone who is tired of the war that every person in those movie theaters was tired of. Had gone on for 7 years at that point. We had thousands of Americans dead and nothing to show for it. Most Americans saw it as a listless forever war, even by then. And so a cog in the machine, injured by it, said no more. And becomes this repentant hero figure that, literally goes on to inspire a whole film franchise made up of other film franchises. It's a very political story about the costs of the war machine of the world we live in. And since then, the MCU has tried to have a broader appeal. I think we can all agree that its stories have lost some of their political punch, certainly since at least after Winter Soldier, I think is probably its most politically on the nose film.
Mm-hmm.
But it's early
I would
on.
argue that Black Panther is, but
that's probably true. Yeah, that's probably true. But you think of those early MCU movies, right? Because Iron Man is very much an anti-military industrial complex movie. Hulk is also following that up, which is the second MCU movie. Incredible Hulk is also very much anti-military industrial complex, with the military literally experimenting on its soldiers to fight the Hulk. Captain America recalls a time in the past when the American military was seen as a force for good, and ends with a character having to sort of realize that time is over, as his first encounter in the present day is people from the government lying to him about where he is. After that, we have Thor, whose whole arc in his first outing on film is about understanding the abuses of power. And then, movies like Black Panther and Captain America, Winter Soldier, some of the most well-received of the MCU movies, are also incredibly politically influenced stories. But now we have movies that don't have that same punch. And I think people, genuinely see that very often these movies aren't as influential. And that's because they're not as political. Because art should be political. When you take the politics out of it, you take the reflection it is of our world out of it, and you disconnect the viewer from the art, and now it's just a thing on the wall. It doesn't mean anything. How can you connect to it. Because if something is political and you hate it, if you hate its message, you connected with it. It influenced you. That might be hard to hear, but it made you feel a thing. It did its job. You don't have to like it.
Yeah. While you've been saying all this, I've been sitting here cataloging in my brain works of great art that I acknowledge as works of great art that have politics I find absolutely risible.
Yeah.
Right. But I can still, like you said, I may have hated it, but it connected with me. It provoked an emotional reaction in me, and it made me think about my own values in new ways.
My go-to example is Heinlein. I have read a lot of Heinlein. I hate politics. I read them in high school. Don't be judgy. But I like his sci-fi is thought-provoking, but I hate the conclusions he draws from it.
Yeah. I was thinking specifically of a lot of Clint Eastwood's films, like the ones that he directed. He's a great filmmaker. But his politics are horrible.
Yeah, they are.
And I think you can make a similar case for Mel Gibson. He's not as talented as Clint Eastwood, but he is a very competent director who makes movies that are quite good if you can put aside your objection to his politics. And the thing that always frustrates me about conversations like this with people from the other side of the aisle is that most of them do not seem capable of doing the same thing.
No.
Like I can acknowledge that, I don't know, what was the last Mel Gibson movie I watched was Heartbreak Ridge, I think it's called.
Oh my God.
It's a World War II movie.
Sure.
Hacksaw Ridge. Hacksaw Ridge is the name of it. It's a World War II movie about it's the story of the first pacifist to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for combat. And he was it's like unbelievable. I looked up his real story, and it's like the real story. If they put the real story on screen, nobody would believe it. So the version you get in Hacksaw Ridge is toned down.
Right.
But he's basically a guy who single-handedly at the Battle of Okinawa, he was a field medic and a conscientious objector who went through a big legal fight to earn the right to serve as a medic without carrying a weapon because he was motivated by what in many ways is a very conservative form of Christianity called Seventh-day Adventism.
Right.
And the movie leans into that as his motivation, his specifically conservative Christian values informing his heroism on the battlefield, where he was willing to risk his life to save I think he saved he's credited with saving, I think in one battle, 75 people.
That's wild.
He ran across minefields and stuff to save people. And he even treated some of the enemy soldiers that he came across. Right. And I love the movie. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
But if I sit and think about the politics of the man who made it, Mel Gibson, the political message he is trying to express through the movie, I want to fight the guy.
Right.
But artistically, it's an amazing movie, and the story it tells is really inspirational.
Yeah,
and I don't see anyone from the political right who could do the same thing with, say, Black Panther or a movie made by an actual communist. Yeah,
right. They have to deny its politics, right? Like we see with Star Wars theory and Star Wars, right? He has to deny the politics of Star Wars to like Star Wars. He can't. He doesn't have something in him doesn't let him grapple with that. And you can see that he struggles with that because it's hard for him to make Star Wars content these days without devolving into fighting his fans like he did with Andor, or without relying on sexism like he did with Acolyte. Because I think there are plenty of criticisms to have of, either of their shows, to be honest, even though I like both of them. He can't do that because that would involve engaging with the politics of it that he denies exist. And it makes I feel bad for him in a very real way that you miss so much of the story trying to hide from it. You by hiding from the art, by hiding from its meaning and its origins and what inspired it, you lose so much. You lose these lessons of history. Like, I didn't get into Gundam because I wanted to learn about the history of the Pan-Asian co-prosperity sphere. But somehow I got into a show about robots and traumatized teenagers and learned about 20th century Japanese and Asian politics and how that influenced World War II and America today and our military industrial complex. Because the creators let their world reflect in their art and made it better for it. In the same way that, Iron Man reflected the Vietnam War and the war in Afghanistan. And like, Marvel's never been bigger.
Yeah.
Like, now we're before, like, it was adapting comics to the movies. Now they, comics are just the lab they test stories out to see what they want to put in the movies. The highest selling Marvel comic in a year won't outsell the worst performing MCU movie.
So your case for why art should be political is what? Give us the elevator pitch.
Here's the elevator pitch. For the art, you will have the most connection with your audience by allowing the work to reflect the world you live in and what influences you, by not trying to hide that from the audience. That by hiding the art, you hide the creator. And you cannot have a fully fleshed out work of art if the creator has to hide parts of themselves actively because it's politically untenable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a movie executive hearing this and you want the pitch, do you want to make Iron Man money, not Black Widow money?
Yeah. Not
you should
Captain America 4 money. Yeah.
Right, exactly. If you want to make Iron Man money and not Captain America 4 money, let your movies be as political as their creators want to be, because you will get a better movie out of it that people want to go see.
Yeah. Have you seen Cap 4 yet, by the way?
Oh, no.
Because, Pillar of Garbage has a great video essay on it.
I saw it, yeah.
How it's an apolitical thriller. And which does not mean it's a thriller movie.
Right.
That doesn't involve politics. It means that it's a movie that has the structure and story beats of a political thriller, but it has no real world politics in it. So it's not saying anything.
Right. It is neither political nor thrilling, despite having the framework of a political thriller.
Right. I mean, it is political in the sense that there are politics within the movie.
Right.
With, the story world of the movie has its own political relationships, but they're not anything like the ones we have in the real world. So it's not connected to a real political issue that we would think about after watching the movie, like the Winter Soldier was. The Winter Soldier is a political thriller because it touches on real issues right now, and Captain America 4 doesn't. It's really weird. It's a fun movie. I enjoyed it, but I noticed that too as I was watching it. And I wish I had thought of the phrase apolitical thriller, because that's
pretty
much it.
Yeah, I was waiting for it to come out on streaming because, getting to a movie theater is hard, and I'm busy. So, sometimes it's just when can I watch it on my iPad on my lunch break over a week? Because we'll just do that instead.
Yeah.
So I think of a great example of a movie that has a political message, that is very propagandistic, but it ends up, the movie would be nothing without it, which is the Manchurian Candidate.
Oh yeah. They tried to remake it.
Yeah.
Or, they did. They didn't try. They did remake. And
they did
remake. It didn't work.
It didn't work because it didn't have the political bite and it didn't live in the time. And so it just feels like this movie that has nothing to say and reflects nothing. Whereas the original, even though it's Red Scare schlock, it has something to say. It reflects that time, and that makes it a worthwhile movie to watch. And even though we are decades removed from the Red Scare, sort of, it's still worth seeing as a product of that time, and it is an entertaining movie. So yeah, watch things that are political. And if someone says this thing is too political, watch it. Don't want to see it now.
Yeah.
Because odds are it'll make you feel something. And that's worth interrogating.
Right. That's why I like so many conservative art projects, because they engage me, right?
Right.
That's the whole point of, I don't want to go to an art like a play or a museum display or a movie or read a book that has nothing to say.
Right.
So even if it says something I don't agree with, it is more valuable to me than a work of art that says nothing.
Right. I would say if a work of art that has nothing to say isn't art, it's content.
Yeah.
It's not art, it's content. If you have nothing to say, you are putting out something for the sake of having something to put out, rather than having something to say and having something to create, and like having the creative ambition. Oh yeah, here's a good example. RxNV brings up Lovecraft.
Of course, the iconic example.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring up Lovecraft when I had this thought. That's why I went with Dudes and Robots.
Mm-hmm.
Because Lovecraft is the example of a guy who has something to say, whose writing reflects his politics and the politics of the time, and is terrible, but is very evocative and very interesting.
To be clear, it's his politics that are terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I like his writing.
I like his writing too.
It's not to everyone's taste, but
no,
his writing is not terrible, and his creativity is not terrible. It's just that, like, if you read a story like The Horror at Red Hook, you will, or you just look up what the name of his cat was in real life, you will see his politics right away, and they're absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
But the parts of his cosmic horror that became popular spoke to something larger. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that cosmic horror is intractably wrapped up in racism.
Yeah, I would say so.
And white supremacy. But to the extent that his invention of, or partial invention of the genre transcends that political dynamic, that's largely down to him, to his talent.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of like alt history, where like a lot of people who are involved in the alt history community will get upset when you point out the origins of alt history are white supremacy. Like that's just a fact. Sorry.
Yes, and that's why the best alternate history writer, Harry Turtledove, his magnum opus is an alternate history where the South wins the Civil War and becomes a totalitarian fascist nightmare, because he's directly addressing the fact that that's the origin of the genre he writes in.
Right. And that is also
still worth reading.
It's still worth reading, right? Yeah, it's like here's another one from J-Kung. If I'm saying that wrong, let me know. Yeah, episode 7. This is another one that I didn't want to like write in my write-up, because episode 7 especially, like, we're introduced to the First Order, which is just Imperial cosplayers, and they don't have anything to say. Like, what are they? What do they want? What are they for? I don't know. They want to blow up a planet. They're the Empire. They're the bad guys. Like in Star Wars, in A New Hope, we know very quickly what the Empire is about, because the movie shows us. It doesn't, like, we have an opening crawl that tells us there's a fascist empire, but like very quickly we see them like capture a ship and blow down the doors, and they're trying to capture someone. And we find out in the movie very quickly they've dismantled the Senate. So there was a democracy, and now that democracy is over. We don't get that in episode 7. Episode 8, an attempt was made.
Mhm.
I don't think it gets there, but an attempt was made. It's probably my main criticism with Episode 8. I think Episode 8 has a lot to say about Star Wars and about the Force. I think it has less to say about the First Order and the galaxy. But I think part of that is it's a sequel to a movie that also had nothing to say. So it only has so much screen time because Star Wars movies have to be 2 hours and 15 minutes. There are rules, goddamn you. And Episode 9 is an apology letter by a beaten spouse.
Yeah.
And a comic book movie.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit ironic of how comparatively apolitical the sequel trilogy is compared to the previous two, and how that has in some ways facilitated the grift around it, because the politics of the sequel trilogy are so vague that anybody can come along and insert, or at least make a plausible attempt to insert whatever political agenda they want into the narrative.
Yeah, because
I think if the sequel trilogy was more explicitly political, like the original trilogy was, it would be harder to run a grift on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the criticisms of the prequel trilogy was that it was too political, especially because it had a very anti American military-industrial complex message to it. And at the time, we're talking about the 2001, 2002 Attack of the Clones era, where like largely popular culture is still in the throes of 9/11 related xenophobia. That movie was probably more poorly received than it would have been in 2008 when Iron Man came out and we were all sick of the wars in the Middle East.
I think that the George Lucas in the prequel trilogy was trying to be a little more sly than he was in the original trilogy. Like he was obviously making a political point, but he was trying to detach it too much from real world politics. So he was hoping we would all see what he was pointing at, but he wouldn't come right out and say it like he did in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like there's no point in the original trilogy where somebody explicitly looks at the camera and goes, "This is a movie about the Vietnam War."
Right.
But it's if you know that that's what George Lucas was trying to say, it is obvious, especially if you look at what happens in Return of the Jedi with the Ewoks.
The furry Viet Cong. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
and we don't see much of that in the prequel trilogy. It's more his political commentary there is more abstract.
I think part of that is that his political in interviews with George Lucas, he talks about how the prequels, people have asked him with Attack of the Clones and with Revenge of the Sith, like, is this a commentary on the Bush administration? And his response is usually, no, it's still about Nixon.
Yeah.
Because Episode 9 came out in 1999, or Episode 1 came out in 1999. So this is before we have the War on Terror, before we have 9/11. So it is still very much a how did we get to Star Wars, and Star Wars is about Nixon. But in the same way, we can, watch Gundam and see, the Western Front of World War II when it's also about the, the Eastern Front of World War II. That George Lucas calls stormtroopers, and uses these very Nazi-esque uniforms, sort of sci-fi Nazi uniforms, and evoking that imagery of World War II. It is also a story about World War II that reflects the world George Lucas grew up in, right? Like all of the space battles were reflections of the fighter pilot videos he saw or films he saw in newsreels and in films after the war.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons that touches on one of the reasons I think that the Nazi imagery of the sequel trilogies doesn't land as well is because the generational memory isn't there. Like,
no, it's not.
The audience of people who went to see the original trilogy were, in some cases, the actual veterans of World War II.
Right.
And their children.
Right.
Who either had just come out of or were still fighting in the Vietnam War.
Right.
So it was just like one generation had a war, then the next generation had a war that involved a huge number of people. And since then, we haven't had anything to maintain that generational trauma.
Right.
I mean, thank you, but that is part of why when you look at like General Hux and his big fascist speech in The Force Awakens, it comes off as silly and cringe.
Right.
Because most of the people in the audience don't remember a time when guys like that actually existed and actually gave speeches like that. And it was a menace to the entire world.
Mm-hmm. And the movie doesn't have the script or the directing to give us something to hang that on, right? He doesn't call for anything in a way that we understand that it means something like that.
Yeah.
Because I think, like, you know, and this is entirely Monday morning quarterbacking. But if I wanted to, when writing the sequel movies, there are two things that come to mind when we're talking about that, like, 2015 era in geopolitics, right? You could do what the MCU did, and you could make the First Order a religious terrorist organization, a la Al-Qaeda, or at the time, like, ISIL, and do that. Or if you wanted to be more approachable to conservative audiences and global regimes, you could have made them sort of a Nazi-ified version of the Arab Spring protests. Which would at least give people something they recognized. Whereas we're too early to, you know, we're pre Richard Spencer getting punched. So the idea that Nazis are even a problem again hasn't really crossed into people's minds.
Yeah.
And so that's not even there. Like the Nazi imagery is just like, oh, it's just doing a Star War again.
Right. And I think that they were relying, the writers of the sequel trilogy, or at least of The Force Awakens, were relying on the nostalgia of what the Nazi imagery in the original trilogy meant to the audience of that time.
Right.
And they weren't accounting for the fact that a lot of that audience is dead now, and or have like aged out of the market or whatever.
Right.
So they can't hang the emotional appeal of fear of fascism on those scenes without actually explicitly saying something.
Right. And also you have a number of, like, in the Star Wars fandom, you have a number of EU writers who rehabilitated the Empire.
Yeah.
In varying ways. And so even the idea that the Empire was capital E evil in some Star Wars fans had been watered down over the course of the EU. And that this new replacement for what in the EU was called the Imperial Remnant doesn't... The First Order feels like it has less to say even than that. And so it's easy to just if you were already sort of in the Empire always strikes back mindset of what you think of the Empire, like the First Order doesn't even come off as that different than and
like I know in the EU they kind of built it up so that Palpatine had what he knew the Yuuzhan Vong were coming.
Yes.
And that's what the Empire was about. And that's at least interesting. I think that's dumb personally, but I think it's too much Imperial apologia.
It is.
But it is interesting, and it's something you can build character motivations out of, like Imperial character motivations out of, that could have been put to good use in the sequel trilogy. I agree with that criticism for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you're going to
fascism thrives on an external threat, real or imagined. And you can see this is what's really done well in the comic book version of V for Vendetta.
Yes.
because the external threat was real. So the people who's in Britain who supported the government, or initially supported it, because they had a genuine fear. And it was easy to understand why so many of those characters maintained their loyalty to the fascist state, like at the level of character storytelling. And it's not so easy to do that in like the sequel trilogy, where they just come off as like cartoonish mustache twirling villains,
right,
with no relatable motivations,
and nobody considers them a threat except for Leia and her cadre of people, her immediate circle of people, right?
Right.
And we're told that. So, like, why should we consider them a threat? Like, yes, they blow up a planet, but, like, it's a Star Wars. People blow up planets. I hate to be like Star Wars has kind of trivialized that, but it's because they originated it, right? Like,
yeah. And there's even something politically interesting there they could have worked with, like, because the generational memory, that's tying to the issue I mentioned before of the generational memory of fascism. Right. Like Leia is part of the World War II generation in this analogy,
right?
Most of whom have died off, and the ones who remain, no one cares what they have to say anymore because old people are cringe or whatever. So when the fascist threat comes back, and the people who actually lived through the first one are screaming, that the sky is falling, they're not wrong, but nobody believes them. And I'm wishing we'd seen more of that in the sequel trilogy too.
Right. I think it would have been more interesting to have, again, we're Monday morning quarterbacking. It would have been interesting if there was, because I know a lot of the new canon novels, there is an Imperial remnant separate from the First Order. It would have been more interesting to have that remnant be a party to all this. We're like, okay, the First Order does its attack on Hosnian Prime and blows it up. And like now the discussion, well, what does the Imperial remnant do with this information? Like, what is their opinion of the First Order? Where like by the end, like we're just supposed to assume those are the same thing. And now, like, even with like the third season of Mandalorian and with Ahsoka, it seems like the First Order, the Imperial Remnant were always the same thing, and it's just like, well, that's not interesting at all.
Well, in the text of the films, which is what most people see, I think most people don't read the books.
No, I would agree.
Most audiences, I should say.
Yeah.
The text of the films, there's no reason to think the First Order is not the entire Imperial remnant.
Right, yeah. But it's just like they're out of nowhere. They want, like they want to destroy the Republic. So they blew up a planet. And then, like, at least with the Death Star, right? Why did they blow up a planet? Well, because it was a demonstration of power to enforce the power they already had, and it was to destroy a hotbed of rebel activity, because one of the leaders of that planet, who they have captive, is from this world that supports her.
Yeah. I think that Force Awakens was trying to evoke 9/11. I think.
Right, but I think that's where the Imperial Remnant could have been used to be like, oh, the New Republic can't protect you from those First Order terrorists. Your world should join the Empire because the New Republic, their capital is gone, and they couldn't stop this terrorist attack, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like
that would have been cool too.
That would be cool too. And like to say, like you could even have this, like, we're the Empire, we're gonna protect you from Starkiller Base, and we're gonna go destroy Starkiller Base. And part of the Resistance's rush to do it is to, not just maybe go there and save Rey, but to find out if the Empire is backing them, to destroy it before the Empire, to go, oh no, the Republic still exists, it still stands, it can still protect you.
Well, hopefully, future movies will explore these questions.
I hope so.
Because what I've wanted from Star Wars for a long time is to move past the Skywalker saga.
Yes.
And explore the future of the galaxy, like the consequences of all of this, like for another generation of people down the line, or even like maybe a couple hundred years down the line. what does the galaxy look like now? And there are some indications that they might be trying that with the Rey movie, if it ever gets off the ground. But yeah,
I do think that the powers that be at Lucasfilm have realized that the Mandalorian sub-franchise is a dead end.
Well, I think they've realized that Star Wars belongs on the big screen and not on television.
I agree too.
It's a cinematic experience, and not as much as some of the TV shows were actually really good, and I enjoyed them a lot out of the ones that I watched. But they still didn't give me that Star Wars experience that I had when I went to see even when I went to see like the Star Wars movies I'm not so great about on the big screen. I was still overwhelmed by the visual and oral spectacle of everything, which is part of the Star Wars experience, I would argue.
Definitely. Yeah. Star Wars it's a film franchise.
Yeah.
Like, it shouldn't, having TV for Star Wars is fine. And I think, there's been good Star Wars TV. But not having, because we're going on 6 years of no Star Wars on the screen. We're not getting a Star Wars movie if everything goes according to plan until next year with the Mandalorian movie, which is the movie finale of a TV show.
Yeah. I mean, we once went a much longer period without Star Wars.
We did. So. Definitely.
But yeah, I think the Rey movie is coming out. Like, film development takes a long time. People don't understand, even for a company like Disney, who has basically infinite money to streamline the production of a film, it still takes a couple of years to get production underway.
Yeah.
And just because we're not hearing about those details every single day doesn't mean that nothing is happening.
If you're doing a RXNV asks, if you're doing a Star Wars, what conflict or idea would you basically call back to? If I was doing one today and wanted to call back to something, I would call back to January 6th.
I thought this was a question about what conflict or idea in the Star Wars universe would you call back to?
If within Star Wars, what would I call back to?
I don't know if that's what the intent of the question was, but that's how I read it.
Yeah.
So you gave a better answer than I did.
Yeah. Okay. So if I wanted to call back to a real world event, I would call back to January 6th. I think a great way to do this would be like in the wake of the New Republic takes back Coruscant or establishes a new capital, and have some zealots hopped up on Imperial propaganda try and take out the government. And I think because I think that the footage for there's a few reasons for that. One, I think that January 6th has been memory hold by the media and the political establishment. And I think showing something on film that is evocative of that would motivate people and make people feel things. Not things they necessarily like, but things in general.
Yeah.
If I were to do a Star Wars based on something that has happened in Star Wars, it would be, this is such a cop-out, but Dawn of the Jedi. I think the schism that creates the Jedi and the Sith, even though at least in the EU, the Sith didn't become the Sith for a while. Like, a number of things happen before they get there, and those haven't been laid out in detail. But to see that philosophical divide of what the early Force traditions were and how they feed into the Jedi and the Sith, because by the time we get to the movie eras, both are broken institutions. The Jedi don't do anything. The Jedi are a reactive organization that doesn't repopulate their numbers outside of by taking children into their weird religious cult and making them cops. And this fails to do anything until Luke Skywalker ignores them. Because if you remember Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda tell Luke that he has to kill Darth Vader and the Emperor. That is the only way this can end well.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two people who were leaders in the Clone Wars and allowed the fall of democracy to happen on their watch. So they failed there, and then they failed again. And Episode 8 calls this out with the history of the Jedi is failure. And I think that is... It would be good to circle back around and see where that history starts and what the seeds of those failure are. Because we see in Andor and in Rogue One and in the original trilogy, the Empire can't govern either. It constantly needs to find enemies to create within. And eventually that's just untenable at scale. And so to see the foundational flaws of those philosophies and how those flaws develop would be interesting.
Well, if I was going to do a Star War, I would lean into the Acolyte. I think I see some people in chat saying that too, because what interested me about the Acolyte was the exploration of the idea that the Jedi and the Republic are themselves a form of soft power imperialism. And there are, in something as big as a galaxy, there are going to be literally billions of cultures who have a completely different understanding of how the Force works and use it in completely different ways. And that's what the most interesting thing about the Acolyte to me was seeing, at least getting like a window into that conflict. And so many people who hated that show did not understand what the main character, who's, for some reason his name is slipping my mind, the Korean actor who played him. They don't understand.
The Sith Lord. The Sith,
No, not the Sith Lord, the Jedi. Played by the guy from Squid Games. Soul.
Master Soul, thank you.
Yeah, so many people who hated the Acolyte did not understand what Soul did wrong. And I think we could have we could have made a whole movie trilogy about that conflict. And I think the Acolyte was a flawed show in a lot of ways, like from a technical aspect, but it was super interesting. And I wish that we were getting more of that in the future. Maybe not necessarily that story, but that that template of exploring the Star Wars galaxy beyond the conflict of the Jedi and the Sith and the Empire and the New Republic and the Skywalkers. What do other people think about the Force and how do they interact with it?
What's funny is that the Acolyte is part of a broader multimedia push. It represents the end of it, called the High Republic era. And it's interesting that like that's what those books is about. There are no Sith. There are remnants of things the Sith did and things in the galaxy that exist as a reflection of that conflict. Where like you have I can't remember the name of the cult, but there is a religious tradition that the Republic calls a cult, that grew out of a world or a galaxy where the Sith and Jedi have been at war forever. And even though the Sith are gone, the Jedi are the enforcers of the government will, and they use the will of reality through the Force to enforce that will. And so this religious movement believes no one should use the Force.
Which is a rational response to the metaphysical reality they live in, because Star Wars sets it up that the Force objectively exists. And there is a light and a dark side with it to it. Everyone in the galaxy is stuck with that. So if it keeps corrupting people, stop using it. And so, but you even see within this movement how far they're willing to go, and do like some of them are like, they do the thing that a lot of
religious families do in this world, where like if a child in a family is queer, they will be harmed, subject to conversion therapy, which is torture, or just thrown out on the streets. Where that families in this religious tradition, if the child is force sensitive, because that just happens in the Star Wars universe, they just throw the kid out. If the kid can't hide, like if the kid can't hide their powers because they know they're not supposed to have them, if that gets found out, they just get thrown out or they get killed. Creating this interesting allegory, because like, now what do you do? Because yes, using the force leads to all these problems, but also people are just born force sensitive.
Yeah.
That's just a consequence of their birth. They're still people that should have all the rights you do. How do you handle that?
Yeah.
And then on the extreme end of this religious movement, you have them making force sensitive creatures through biochemistry, through genetic engineering. They make force sensitive creatures to hunt force sensitives.
Yeah. Which you would have to do.
Have to do. So
because you're stuck in the same reality as everyone else. Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting to see how it plays out. And that doesn't work in a galaxy with the Sith active. Yeah. So the books create that environment, and it's really cool to explore. But they're in books, and you know, obviously, like if you're someone who just watches Star Wars on movies and on TV, you're not going to see that, and nor should you. That should get better adaptations.
Yeah. Now, here's the real world conflict I would call back to in a Star Wars movie, and it would be the allegory would be droids. Okay. There's a scene, I think it's it was either in the Boba Fett show or one of the later seasons of The Mandalorian, where they go to a droid bar.
Yeah, it's in Mandalorian.
Okay. And it's so from that scene, it becomes clear that droids have their own culture and their own society and everything.
Yeah.
Which means they are slaves.
Yeah, they are.
So I think it would be really interesting to do a Star Wars story about a civil war over the question of droid liberation and droid rights.
Right.
Because that's always been like the thing that bothered me about. I love Star Wars, but one of the few things that bothered me about it from an ethical perspective is the treatment of droids, because they're obviously written as sentient beings.
Right.
But everyone treats them like property. So there's an interesting story to be told there in a Star Wars context about what happens if the droids decide they don't want to be slaves anymore.
I always thought it was interesting, and I know Dane has talked about this before, that the only character we see treat droids like people are Luke and Anakin.
Yep.
They ask the droids to do things. They talk to the droids like they're people. And there's still this relationship where they own the droid.
I was going to say that. A lot of plantation owners were also polite to their slaves.
Right, exactly. But it's interesting that like that stands out as character traits of those two characters.
Yeah. Right. And so a character like that could be the sympathetic Confederate character for the white person in the audience to connect to, the one who grew up in the Confederacy and has a vague sense that there's something wrong with their society, but they can't quite put their finger on it. And over the course of the story, their arc leads them to understand that, all of this has to come down.
Right.
Peach
brings up a good point in trait. Rey does this in Star Wars.
Yes, she does. Yeah, that's correct.
I forgot about that. So good point.
Yeah. In fact, like the interaction between her and BB-8 early in the Force Awakens is one of the most important ways that we establish that her character has compassion.
Yeah.
You know, the whole meeting between her and BB-8 that's the role that plays in the script. So yes, the Skywalkers, blood or adopted, tend to be nice to droids.
That would be, I think you're really onto something there. I would love to see, despite talking about like not wanting Jedi as much in things, or Sith as much or Sith in things as much, I would love part of this conversation to involve the Jedi, because to the force sensitive mindset, regardless of the traditions we have seen, the force is something that belongs to living things.
Mm-hmm.
But droids are disconnected from the force.
But what if one of them suddenly wasn't?
Right, that's an option.
Mm-hmm.
Or why does that matter?
Yeah.
Because I think that's the more interesting question is, well, most people aren't connected to the force the way the Jedi are. And our point of view in Star Wars is from the Jedi perspective, because Luke is our point of view character for Star Wars.
Yeah.
Everything hinges on Luke Skywalker. This is why people who hate Last Jedi don't like Last Jedi, is because they don't like how Luke is portrayed. And we can discuss that, and we can like it or dislike it. But I think we all agree that Luke is the thing that Star Wars hinges on, including the prequels, because it's about his father. This is why the Machete Order exists.
Yeah.
That like having the Jedi have to grapple with, like, well, okay, droids aren't connected to the Force, but really, as far as most people are concerned, only you are.
Yeah.
And everyone just takes that you have space magic. They have to kind of take your word that the Force is everywhere and connected to every living thing, because they don't know one way or the other. They just see you throw things around with your mind and go, "Well, you're probably right, because I don't want you to throw me around with your mind."
Yeah. Again, this is something people hated about the prequels, was the whole midichlorians thing.
Right, exactly.
Before that, it was never explicitly said in Star Wars media, but there was a sense that basically anybody could learn to use the Force.
Right.
If they just like wanted to go through the discipline and training. And then the midichlorians established that no, there's this genetic elite who are at best, the best case in, interpretation is that they're just inherently better at the Force than everyone else, or they are the only ones who can use the Force.
Right.
And that brought a lot more of a sense of a genetic aristocracy into the story that I personally didn't like, but
it also it contradicts itself as to how the story of the prequels works, because we're told that there is this like genetic thing to the Force. There's a genetic component to it. And because of the original trilogy, we know that Anakin's child is also strong in the Force. And his other child is also, but to a lesser extent, strong in the Force.
Right. Well, the prequel trilogy didn't explore that enough, I think, because it would make sense that if that some, like in the real world, whatever particular skill you want to talk about, there are just some people who have more raw talent at it than others. But if they don't train that skill, they're not going to be just instantly good at it. And they could have explored in the prequel trilogy a little better how the society that built up around people who have a genetic predisposition to being good at using the Force became the ruling class. There were a lot of questions to explore there. But I think going forward, I would like to see more cultures with different interpretations and applications of the Force, because everyone is stuck with the light side and the dark side being a real thing. But that doesn't mean that everyone has to interpret the good side or the light side as the good side and the dark side as the bad side. And like sort of what they were doing in the Acolyte was bringing in a culture that saw these two things as being like, they took the idea of balance more seriously than the Jedi did. You know, by accepting that the dark side is just part of nature, and we can work with that in constructive ways, or we can try to tear it down like the Jedi have apparently been trying to do.
I think two interesting like examples from Star Wars fiction outside of this off the screen that play with the how the Force relates to society in interesting ways. One I've talked about on the show before, which is the Knights of the Old Republic video game, because you can play a dark Jedi who is still a member of the Jedi Order or a light side Sith, and your character justifies their behavior within those philosophies, even though you're the wrong thing. Where you could use the Jedi code to justify atrocities. And likewise, you can use the Sith philosophy to justify being a benevolent person.
I mean, philosophically, from what I've read of their philosophies, I have more sympathy for the Sith, philosophically speaking.
Right. It's interesting.
Than the Jedi, because the Jedi are about like cutting off all connections and like being super like ascetic and like basically monks, right? And then are still expected to function within the broader society as a.
They're supposed to be detached from society, but also the enforcers of society, and that.
Well, they're supposed to be detached from their emotions, right? Which is really a bad thing to teach children. Whereas the Sith say, no, fuck that. The emotions are where we get our power, but then they go too far,
right? Because
they're not, they're out of balance. And so, like in the Acolyte, we're seeing a culture that has apparently developed a study of the Force that gets around that problem and just integrates the dark side into their study and practice of the Force without either light side or dark side users turning into monsters.
Right. Now we don't see that society long enough because they die. Spoilers for the Acolyte. We don't really get to explore, because I think that society is interesting to explore because it does hint that like there are tensions within this and emotions that aren't controlled that could lead to those sorts of incidents, but we see it burn down before we see any of those tensions play out. And I think that's my main criticism of the Acolyte, is that we are shown the potential of tensions within this witch cult, that the development of it is cut short, probably because the show is only 8 episodes.
Yeah.
And it needed time to breathe.
Well, I think cutting it short, I think, was kind of the point, though.
Yeah.
That was the crime, right? That was that's what Saul did wrong.
Right.
He failed to have empathy when he really needed it.
Well, and they all did, and they're taught not to, right? That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
They're taught not to have that level of empathy, and that leads them to commit multiple atrocities just on that planet, just with that group of Jedi.
Yeah.
All right, I have to address this one because this is going to be in my craw. All right, Screwface Capone, friend of the channel, asks, so I got to ask, are Grey Jedi a thing or just a fandom thing? That is a fandom thing. There are no Grey Jedi in canon.
Wait,
in either
are you saying
canon.
Qui-Gon was not a Grey Jedi?
Grey Jedi are not a thing, yeah.
Damn, there's fighting words.
Let me be specific. There is not a philosophical tradition in Star Wars called Grey Jedi.
Yeah.
There are Jedi within both continuities that identify as members of the Jedi Order that are less adherent to Jedi dogma. Qui-Gon Jinn is one. Kyle Katarn from the Dark Force games is another. Jolie Bindo from KOTOR is my favorite. They are, all of those characters are members of the Jedi Order. They are not members of a different tradition. They are just not part of the religious dogma or the philosophical dogma of those orders. So the term Grey Jedi is not a canonical term to either the canon or the EU. But the underpinning that represents the concept exists.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the idea, in my memory serves correctly, the idea of the Grey Jedi arose from the character of Qui-Gon.
Yeah. I
think it may have been floating around fandom before that, but like when a character who, like him, was put on screen, a lot of people saw that as the franchise giving a green light to the idea of canonizing the Grey Jedi.
Yeah.
Qui-Gon was one of the most interesting Jedi characters.
Oh, yeah, it's great. So I think to talk about another Star Wars story that has an alternate look at the Jedi, and this sort of touches on the genetic dynasty and the aristocracy of Force users, is there was the Star Wars Vision shorts that Disney has put out. There is a book that is a expansion of one of those shorts called The Ronin. And this is it's based off of the season 1 Visions short that is like a black and white samurai movie where the only thing that are colored are the red lightsabers. And it's very much drawn, and the storytelling is very much right out of a samurai movie. And this story expands that world, and in that world, the Jedi are an aristocracy. They run it is the Jedi are control the Empire. If this is a very feudal Japanese style empire, which makes sense, but it is implied that like it is inherited, like it's all about the bloodlines and stuff, and that the Sith were a revolutionary group that tried to break up this empire, and failed. And so it reverses the Jedi are the enforcers of society, but society is the empire. And the Sith are still the counterbalance to that. And still involved, like the dark and light side don't work the same way in that universe. Where like it even affects how force powers work. The dark side is more about using the force to manipulate the world around you. Where the light side is more about using the force to manipulate yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the light side is good or the dark side is bad. Those are just what are described as the light and dark side of the force is how you are using it in the world. And both Sith and Jedi use both.
Right. That's what I was just thinking. Like the distinction between the light and the dark side is arbitrary.
Right.
The force just is the force.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the people, the humans and the aliens who use the force, who came up with these distinctions based on their lived experiences and their philosophies and so forth. That doesn't mean that one side of that there are actually sides to the force.
Right.
We don't know. The force is a mystery, and I think it works best if it stays that way. And trying to codify it as being that the Jedi and the Sith construction of the force is the correct one across all of Star Wars history forever, I think is a constraint on the narrative that they don't need.
Right. And I think when they've played with that before, they've told some of the most interesting stories.
Yeah.
Where you have like the Star Wars Legacy comics towards the end of Dark Horse's holding of the comics license, wherein you have three major force-using traditions. You have the Jedi, who largely believe Jedi things, though they're in hiding because they were wiped out. But before that, they were about rehabilitating the galaxy after the Yuzhan Vong War. They were about like bringing people together, including the Yuzhan Vong, to repair the damage done by that war that affected the whole galaxy and killed trillions. You have the Sith, who are very much about manipulating people and societies towards mostly wiping out the Jedi because they have historical beef. And once they do that and they take over, they don't really know what to do with themselves because they're a fascist cult that won. But now what do you do? And so they just sort of fall apart to infighting, and everyone turns
sounds
against
familiar.
them. Right. And you have the Empire that kind of resurged. They have their own tradition of force users who are about protecting the imperial aristocracy, but also killing them if they go too far. So like the emperor, the imperial dynasty are now force sensitives.
Yeah.
And the Imperial Knights, their first mission is if the emperor does emperor things, to get a lightsaber in the back. But they're still like enforcers of imperial will. So like they too are on the precipice of like
that's great. A system that's not going to fuck up at all. Not at all. Perfect system. Perfect system.
Perfect system. It doesn't fuck up at all. It fucks up a lot. And the main character is actually the like great grandchild of Luke Skywalker, who hates the Jedi and hates the Sith and does drugs to tune out the Force because he hates the Force.
Mm-hmm.
And so he does death sticks to deaden his connection to the Force, both to hide from all of the Force traditions looking for the stupid Skywalker, and to remove himself from this war. It doesn't go his way.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very the more Force traditions you have in Star Wars, the better the storytelling is. And I think that the examples we've given here today and the ideas we've talked about here today do a pretty good job of exemplifying that.
If anyone from Disney is listening,
Yeah.
We are available.
I like my job. I don't like it that much.
So Jay Bird just asked an interesting question that I was going to bring up too. Like, will Rey's new Jedi Order learn from the history of the Jedi, or will they too fall? I think that's what I was just wondering too, is will the new Star Wars movies have Rey moving beyond the Jedi versus Sith tradition and adopting the philosophy that tradition is a tour guide, it is not a law book, right?
Right. I have here is my screwball pitch for that movie.
Mm-hmm.
I want there to be Jedi in that movie who are the bad guys.
Yeah.
Who are if Rey is starting her own Jedi Order, which is where her story ends in Rise of Skywalker, she wants to do her own thing. She has built her own lightsaber to do that, or as part of that training. But we don't know how big Luke's order was. We don't know who or what the survivors look like or what shape they are in. We know the academy burned down, but it's a big galaxy.
Yeah. There's no way she's the there's no way in a galaxy that big. Yeah, there's no way she's the only one. And
go ahead, I'm sorry.
There's also just no way
right
that Luke was the last Jedi. There's no way.
Right.
There had to be some. I mean, that's why we've been getting Ahsoka and other characters like that popping up from time to time, because it's logistically it's impossible.
Right.
That there are no people after Order 66.
Right.
That there are no people left anywhere in the galaxy who have Jedi training. That's just implausible. I agree. It would be interesting to have, and it would be even cooler if the Jedi bad guys in the story weren't evil.
Right. They're just the antagonist.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Right. They're the antagonist. They don't fall to the dark side. They're just at cross purposes with how the Jedi should be.
Yeah.
Because I think that is Star Wars, something that Star Wars has touched on to varying degrees, but has never explicitly had space for a Jedi versus Jedi conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a space that, it can give us the cool lightsaber battles we want from a Star Wars movie. And fun lightsaber colors, because everyone loves fun lightsaber colors. That's a good. If you've seen Skeleton Crew, the bad guy from Skeleton Crew is a Force sensitive who pretends to be a Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget. Honestly, I didn't care for Skeleton Crew that much. It seems like a very good show for people who like that kind of story. Unfortunately, that is not me. I know Dane really likes Skeleton Crew. I know
I enjoyed it, but it does. But I agree. I'm maybe I'm in the middle between you and Dane.
Sure.
I enjoyed the show, but I didn't love the show, and I think it's because it relies a lot on nostalgia for the Goonies.
Yeah,
it was a movie I actually do not like. So,
I just
But yeah, to get back to Jay Bird's question, I think that if they went with a story where Rey unites all of the Jedi or all of the Force users into a new Jedi Order, and then it falls apart from within, that would just be retreading old territory that we've already seen, and I think that would be a bad choice.
I would like her to be the leader of a Jedi Order in a mosaic of Force traditions that exists, and we can see interact.
Yeah, a cool story could be built about the Rey's new Jedi Order, using the word Jedi loosely, finding students from all of these different traditions and trying to integrate those competing visions rather than imposing the Jedi interpretation on everyone.
Right.
Because we've already seen that in The Acolyte. We've already seen where that path leads. That leads to murder.
Right.
And genocide. However good your intentions you may think you have, if you lack the ability to understand that your way is not the way the universe is mandated, it's just your arbitrary frame, you will inevitably harm other people.
And it's interesting.
And I think Rey, what we've seen of Rey, she has the emotional intelligence to understand that.
Right.
Because her whole goal was to, and she succeeded in turning Kylo Ren away from the dark side.
Right. And I think what's interesting about Kylo Ren's character in that movie is Kylo Ren is already part of his own Force tradition. He is not a Sith.
Yeah.
Kylo Ren is very specifically denied the teachings of the Sith by Palpatine in that movie. That, like, because we're shown that Snoke is a clone. Basically created to create these Force cults. That, like, he was always a puppet and never a real player in that institution of the Sith.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's interesting that, like, he is still very much a character steeped in the dark side until he works his way through that. And part of him working his way through that is realizing that he got played.
Yeah. I mean, he's just one of the many missed opportunities across the Star Wars franchise for them to do something interesting with Force users beyond the Jedi and Sith dichotomy.
Yep. One of my, like, I think this is the biggest sin I have with The Rise of Skywalker is that Kylo Ren dies at the end. I think a Star Wars galaxy wherein Kylo Ren lives and has to answer for his crimes. Both his actual crimes, the crimes he was sort of manipulated into committing as part of this, for lack of a better term, cult. And both as someone who is going to be seen by people who were friends and family of the Solos and Skywalkers as a traitor to his family and someone who betrayed everything his family worked for. To have that character alive and be able to visit those stories would have grown the Star Wars universe in such interesting ways that we just can't have now.
Yeah. We could have had that if they, Disney hadn't blinked and made Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah.
It's so sad to me, like that the quality of the sequel trilogy rises or falls on Rise of Skywalker. If they had nailed that story, the third story, if they had gone forward with something that wasn't trying to appease the angry fans,
right,
there was the potential that the entire trilogy would have been redeemed in those people's eyes by,
I think so,
by that choice.
Right.
Because those of us who loved The Last Jedi, one of the things we loved about it is that it was willing to push the boundaries of what a Star Wars story could be.
Right.
And it made a huge amount of money. So a lot of people liked it, and I'm sure a lot of them were just people who show up to go, ooh, look, lightsaber fight. Awesome.
But a movie doesn't make that much money unless you have people going back to see it again and again.
Correct. People saw The Last Jedi multiple times, and they saw The Rise of Skywalker multiple times too.
Yeah.
And there are good things in The Rise of Skywalker. There are things that I wish they had leaned into more.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I could have used less fake out deaths for characters and more of the characters interacting and talking to each other. And I could have used that space battle to be a little more coherent. Because that space battle is possibly the worst space battle in Star Wars history.
Yeah.
For a point of comparison, people hate on the prequels, and rightfully so sometimes. Watch the opening battle at the beginning of Episode 3 and compare it to that in The Rise of Skywalker.
Well, Episode 3 is the prequel that's a legitimately good movie.
Yeah, that movie fucks.
No. Yeah, the other two movies are they're okay. And that's like Revenge of the Sith is a good example of what Rise of Skywalker could have been. Because the fact that Revenge of the Sith is a genuinely good movie, it redeems the other two movies in the eyes of fans years later.
And like that movie, like the opening battle, like I remember when I first saw fun fact. Before that movie came out, before Revenge of the Sith came out in theaters, Lego Star Wars, the new Lego Star Wars game came out, and it had levels for Revenge of the Sith, but it doesn't have the full plot because Lego Star Wars is kind of silly, but there's not really any dialogue or anything to explain what's going on.
Lego Star Wars is my Star Wars, so tread carefully.
Okay, no, but Lego Star Wars is fantastic, and I love it.
Yeah.
I think it is good that it does those things because it makes it about the game rather than just retelling Star Wars. I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you boot up that segment, and the Lego stage you're in is with the little fighters doing that battle. And I went from like, I'm going to see it because I love Star Wars. I don't know how good it's going to be, to I want to see this fucking movie. And then I saw this fucking movie several times and sat through theaters of screaming children because Anakin is torturing his wife to death. Just to see that space battle again. Because that battle fucks. Compare that to the battle in The Rise of Skywalker, which happens.
Yes, The Rise of Skywalker is a movie.
It is a movie. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a John Williams soundtrack that legally makes it a Star Wars movie.
Mm-hmm. Oh, now Jay Bird is opening up the Picard season 3 discourse. I'm not sure we're prepared for this.
Okay,
I agree. I did not like Picard. I didn't like the Picard series at all.
Okay,
it is my least favorite Star Trek series.
I would agree. Asterisk, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
So
let's table that for another FAP because we're at like 2.5 hours now. We don't want to like run this all night.
Thing. Dane likes Star Trek Picard season 3.
Okay.
So if we want to talk shit on this, we have an opportunity to do so now.
Right. The asterisk here is that, to me, Star Trek at its worst is better than almost anything else on television.
It's true.
So with that asterisk in place, Picard is my least favorite Star Trek series.
Yeah, same. I would agree. And yeah, everything you have to say, I agree with. I think the second to last episode of Picard season 3 is the worst episode of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
It is the worst. Also, yes, Jay Kung once again with the killer. Disney really needs to protect its actor from online dork rage. Abso-fucking-lutely.
Mm-hmm.
The solution to online dork rage isn't to make fan panels, to make movies about what fan wants, because fans are dumb. And I say that as a fan. We're morons. We don't know what we want.
Yes,
shut the
agreed.
fuck up.
Your job as a storyteller is not to give the fans what they want. It's to give the fans what they need and don't realize they need until you give it to them.
Right. Let creators, writers, directors, producers, actors, special effects people, let them make a goddamn movie.
Yes. This is why you shouldn't care about canon.
Right. Canon is alive by Big Wiki to sell more ads.
Right. So asterisk there. I've made a video about this too. But
yeah, you have.
If you are a fan, it's totally legit to like really get into canon. If that's your thing, if that's your level of engagement, and that's what gives you joy, go for it. But if you are the person who has been hired to write a story in this universe, canon should be at the bottom of your list.
Mm-hmm.
It should still be on the list, but it should be at the bottom of your list because canon exists to facilitate character development and story. It does not exist to be a straitjacket on future generations of storytellers to impose the will of a single generation on all future artists and creatives. That's not canon is a stupid idea anyway. It was taken from organized religion, which I'm not as negative on as a lot of people, but there are still huge problems with doing that. Canon, it was created in fandom, basically arose in the context of capitalism and the creation of IP and the monetization of this kind of stuff.
Right.
And that's what it's for. So.
And also the idea that Star Wars had a coherent canon is a myth and a lie.
Yes. The idea that any fictional universe had a coherent, even the Lord of the Rings does not have a coherent canon.
No.
If you really dig into, like, Tolkien himself did not think that his universe had a coherent canon. That's like a huge part of what the Silmarillion and all the stuff that was published after his death is him like retconning almost everything
and
that
like
he put in his book.
Retconning the retcons, and like it's interesting. It's fascinating. It's a very dense read. But like the idea that like canon is something you should enforce on other people, no. And if you want to ask someone who agrees with me, George Lucas knew there was a whole canon in Star Wars by the time he started writing the prequels. He kept one thing. Like, he didn't go out of his way to contradict things, but he took one thing from that. And that was in George Lucas's notes for the Star Wars galaxy. The capital of the Empire was called Imperial Center. And in Heir to the Empire, Thrawn called it Coruscant. And George Lucas was like, that's a great name for a planet.
It is. And he's right. That's a better name.
Right. It's a great name for a planet. And that is the thing he took from the EU. And that is it.
And the EU gave us great characters. You know, Thrawn is a great example. I know a lot of people who don't know that Thrawn is from the EU.
It's from the EU, yeah.
They think he was just from, was it Clone Wars? Is that what he was?
Clone Wars, yeah.
Yeah. I haven't seen Clone Wars yet, unfortunately.
It's fine. It's a perfectly fine Star Wars show.
Yeah. But he's such a great character, though. He's a great antagonist, and the reason he makes a great antagonist is because he's not a Force user,
right?
And he's not like a complete psychopath like the Emperor was. Like,
right?
He's a sociopath. He's a ruthless killer, but he has I remember my first introduction to him was reading the Timothy Zahn novels.
Oh yeah.
In Heir to the Empire. And I think the very first scene we meet him in, he's studying the art of a planet that he's about to conquer.
Yep.
And he has this whole conversation with whoever he's talking to about how if you can truly like empathize with the people you're trying to conquer or with your enemy, it makes you a better conqueror.
Right.
You know? And I was like, whoa, that is different from Palpatine. You know, so
Thrawn is interesting for and I think part of the reason that because a lot of Thrawn fandom is why like Empire FAP is the way it is. Because Thrawn is a cool character. But people miss that Thrawn is his own downfall.
Yep.
Because one thing Thrawn doesn't understand is he doesn't understand, like, yes, understanding the emotions and empathizing with the emotions of a culture will help you understand the culture, but he doesn't understand individual people's motivations.
Yes.
And so, like, Jerus Sabaoth effectively takes control of his fleet from under him with the Force because he doesn't understand that Sabaoth is crazy.
Yes.
And that he is not a rational actor. He's a crazy person whose cognitive functions have declined because of his cloning. He doesn't understand that the people he trusts to guard him are loyal to him because of a lie. And if they find out that's a lie, they're going to kill him. So he's killed by his bodyguard, Rook, who kills him because he finds out from one of his people that their loyalty to the Empire was based on Darth Vader lying to them. And so he's sitting on his chair going, wow, this battle is going badly. And then he dies because he gets stabbed from behind.
Yeah. Yep. And, but we're short selling or selling short the best character in the Heir to the Empire trilogy, which was Luke.
Which we've done episodes on. Heir to the Empire is great. Thrawn is a really good character, but part of the reason he is great is how he is defeated. Is he is like so many Star Wars, like he's the perfect Star Wars villain because he's defeated by himself.
Yeah, but he's defeated because he has different flaws that undo him than Palpatine had, and that's what made him an interesting villain.
Right. He has different flaws, and the heroes can't exploit the things that made the Empire beatable before because he's a different sort of person, and that creates an interesting story, which is why you need to tell different stories and let them reflect the things that have influenced you.
I mean, the EU is, before it was considered canon by, I guess, by the fans, was a great example of why you shouldn't have canon. Because EU writers made up all kinds of shit that George Lucas had no hand in at all.
And often didn't like when he heard about it. He was asked about it at conventions, like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
What's funny
some of it was great.
Great.
A lot of it was garbage, but 90% of all pop culture is garbage.
Regardless
of genre. Sturgeon's law. But But yeah, the EU is entirely built on, or is facilitated by George Lucas not really caring too much about canon,
right?
Giving creatives the freedom to explore new ideas within the milieu that he had built.
So when Timothy Zahn was hired to write Heir to the Empire, he asked, like, hey, is there like any background material or something you have from George or from the production of the movies that I could use to like do some world building with? And they handed him the books for the West End game role-playing game and went, this is what we've got.
Yeah.
We have a licensed role-playing game. All the alien names, Twi'lek, Rodian, pretty much all come from that game.
Yeah. I noticed that. Yeah.
Yep.
My words are failing me now, but it's an unappreciated gem is the original West End Star Wars role-playing game, which had a pretty interesting game mechanic system as well.
Different system for sure. It's a very interesting system. It's not my favorite Star Wars system, but it is a very good one.
At the time, it was quite innovative.
Oh yeah, at the time it was revolutionary.
Yeah, like I loved the wild die mechanic that represented the influence of the dark side.
Yep,
that was pretty cool. But yeah, a lot of the lore of Star Wars comes from, and that game, by the way, was not written by George Lucas.
No.
So a lot of that lore was made up by people who, again, whose creativity was facilitated by George Lucas not being a canon tyrant,
right,
and letting them come up with stuff. Because even if you are the creator of this great milieu, this great world, other people might have better ideas than you that will make your creation better, and you don't want to like cut them off at the knees and force them to do what you want.
George had a great capitalist strategy wherein he realized he had a hit and he knew merchandising was the way to keep it going. And so if I can sell you a license and you can do the work and I can make money, have fun over there.
And then I have access to all of your best ideas.
Right. And that's why we have the name Coruscant.
Yeah. And Kashyyyk and Twi'lek and and Rodian. Yeah. All that.
A bunch of most of the alien names. I think the ones we like, Hutt is George, Wookiee is George, Ewok is George. Duros, Gand. I guess Mon Calamari is George.
There's a few that were him. But, I think Coruscant comes from the games.
Yeah, it comes from No, that comes from Zahn. That's Zahn. That one.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah, it was. I think it was Imperial Center in the role playing games.
Okay.
But he made it Coruscant because if the rebellion controls it, why would it be called Imperial Center? Because the Empire is not in control of this planet. It needs a name like a planet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we have. I feel fapped. How do you feel?
I think I've blown my load here.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, thank you all 33 of you for coming out tonight. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and chat. Comment below after the video is up. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
I want to pitch something real quick. Or plug something. Hold on. Let me just mute my microphone.
All right.
Okay, there was a loud motorcycle going by. I am working on a video essay.
Ooh.
I don't know how long it's going to take me to complete, but the theme of the video essay is it's going to be about the TV show The Rings of Power.
Ooh.
And it's about how the story structure of The Rings of Power is itself a series of rings using an old story structure called chiasm or chiastic story structures, which you see in ancient literature like the Bible or the Iliad, the Odyssey, Beowulf, that kind of stuff. And how the story structure of the show answers a lot of the questions, the supposedly mysterious questions about character motivation and plot points and things like that, that a lot of the chuds have made a lot of hay out of.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they just haven't been paying attention to how the show is structured. And
right.
Once you understand that The Rings of Power is using this story structure, which, by the way, The Lord of the Rings, the book, also used, almost all of those mysteries disappear.
Uh-huh.
And it's not, and the show is not just doing it through the writing, like through the script. It's also doing it through cinematography, through lighting, through the music. There's reflections and circles, things circling back on each other all over the place in that show. So
very interesting. I look forward to it.
Yeah. Could take me a year. It could take me a month. I don't know, but it's what's really filling up my brain right now.
It's cooking.
Yeah. So look for that on my channel.
Yes. I have nothing to plug besides this show. I guess the next thing I have coming up is Phoenix Con in August, which is a gaming convention in Appleton, Wisconsin, where I will be for one day. So, other than that, have a good night, and we will see you next week. I imagine that the Shillcast will be on Wednesday at the normal same bat time, same bat channel.
Same shill time, same shill channel.
Pardon. So, have a good night, people, and praise Bill.
Praise Bill and free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Peace.
Oh, cancel, stay, end stream. I know what I'm doing.
Peace.
Sounds like we got a real problem out here. Any of you incel, QAnon, 4chan, Snyder Cut motherfuckers want to get on a line now? Anybody? I think so.